Del, are you ready to begin?
Yes, thanks, Kendra. And I will note to everyone that as I'm doing our short introduction, there might be some dinging sounds as people are being welcomed into the event. So I apologize for that. So good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for joining the Florida Food Policy Council's monthly Florida Food Forum. We welcome to everyone joining on cyber systems or phone lines, and welcome to all accessing the program in the future with the magic of a recording of today's event. With us from the council is Administrator Kendra Love, and I'm asking Kendra now to let us all know when we have 5 minutes left, and we are also asking viewers to submit questions in the chat box. So as we go through the presentation, please use the chat box for the questions, and after the presentation, then we'll go to the questions, which is an important feature of the Florida Food Forum. Is a lot of times presentations like this are just chalk and talk, and we don't have an opportunity for questions. Well, we love the questions, and it's part of what the forum is about. The focus of this edition of the Florida Food Forum is the National Farm Bill, and the focus will be on what the bill means to the Florida food system. The National Farm Bill is important to all states and all regions, especially Florida, because of the major agricultural operations that go on in Florida, but also because of the diversity of the agriculture operations in Florida. Everything from significant citrus and fruit production, and of course the beef industry, which is thriving in Florida. So the Farm Bill impacts Florida in many ways, but not just in terms of agriculture and food production, but also in food distribution, because of the high number of urban centers that we have in the state, and also because of food insecurity that is certainly evident in the state of Florida. So in this context, then, understanding and assessing the impact of the National Farm Bill on Florida's food system is critical to food policy in the state, but also to food policy as it may develop at the county level, the municipal level, and even at the personal level. And so today, the Florida Food Forum will consider the National Farm Bill and its impact on Florida's food system and food policy in the state. Thanks as always for joining us. A document introducing our presenter for today is posted on the council's website. And if you're registered for the event, you've seen the introduction on the talents and achievements of today's special and distinguished guest, Mikhail Scott. Mikhail serves as the Strategic Partnerships Coordinator with the Florida Department of Agriculture, the Division of Nutrition and Wellness, which is under the direction of Commissioner Nikki Fried. Mikhail earned his Bachelor's Degree of Science from Florida Agriculture and Mechanical University, FAMU, and has experience at multiple levels of government, having served in legislative roles in the United States House of Representatives and the Florida House. We are honored to have him with us. And so to begin, it's my pleasure to welcome Mikhail Scott to Florida Food Forum. Mikhail, welcome indeed.
Thank you so much, Del, for that very warm introduction. Just as a note, can everybody hear me? Del, are you able to hear me well?
Yes.
Perfect. All right, well, first, I really want to send an appreciation to the Florida Food Policy Council for the invitation to speak today, and also all the commitment that they've put towards bringing more awareness to the importance of our food system and food security. So, Del, do I have the floor now, or are we going to be going back, or is it just ready for me to just move ahead and start to discuss?
It's all you, Mikhail, all you. I'm going to mute my mic, so it's just going to be you talking until you're finished, and then I'll pick up and Kendra and I will field the questions. So welcome indeed, Mikhail, and I'm going to put my mic on mute.
All right, perfect. Well, what I have to say is that, I told Del and Kendra this, but just to know, and for all the viewers as well, we definitely have to give a special shout out to Florida Food Policy Council for all the work that they've been doing. I have a chance to listen in on these forums quite frequently, and to be here today speaking, to share some of this good information about our department, speak a little bit about the Farm Bill, and also just how it truly impacts, and also how some of our divisional programs impact the food system here in Florida. And so, before I dive too deep into the Farm Bill itself and how it impacts local food systems, I'd really like to just speak a little bit about the Department of Agriculture and the work that we do specifically in the Division of Food, Nutrition, and Wellness. and how that really impacts the Florida's local food system and the major role that it actually plays. Some of you may be familiar with the department and what we do, but in the Division of Food Nutrition and Wellness, we actually conduct, supervise, and administer child nutrition programs, commodity food distribution programs, and also many other assistance and benefits programs that we are doing while also providing outreach, guidance, training, and a lot of other resources to students, parents, and teachers all alike. So what we're doing here is really trying to be as impactful and really trying to touch as many networks and communities as possible with the work that we do at the department. When it relates to the actual food system itself, I think that there are about 4 major that we operate and oversee that are extremely impactful. Those programs include the National School Lunch Program, the Summer Food Service Program, or Summer Break Spot, as we call it here in Florida, the Emergency Food Program, which is also known as TFAP, and the Commodity Supplemental Food Program. And so what I want to do briefly is just speak on each of these different programs that we offer, speak about how they impact the food system, so that way if folks are a little bit unsure or haven't been privy to this information in the past, you'll have a better understanding of what our department does and how we operate. So the first thing I'd like to start with is the National School Lunch Program. And that's actually a federally assisted program that we actually operate in both public and nonprofit schools across the state of Florida, as well as residential childcare institutions. So when you have kids that are staying in smaller community homes for daycare and other services of that nature. The program benefits essentially enhance academic performance because we're allowing these students and after giving these students an opportunity to have nutritious meals, to have wholesome meals. And I'm sure many of you know that statistics show students that have access to more nutritious and wholesome meals at breakfast or at lunch are a lot more capable and are able to get their lessons a lot more and also just better develop as far as their educational academic programs are concerned. So another great part about that program is that it improves students' understanding and generally their intake of fruits and vegetables, which we know is just good for overall health and wellness. And so, this program is very important to Florida's food system because many of our students across the state really depend on these meals as their sole source of food during the weekdays. And, especially after COVID-19 and seeing what happened with school closures, I think it's more evident than ever before of how important programs like the National School Lunch Program are in many children's lives across the state. Even in 2019 to 2020 school year, we were able to serve over 190 meals throughout the state, both free and reduced meals at that for students that needed those the most. So one of the other programs is the Summer Food Service or Summer Break Spot. Obviously, school is important, and we know that those school meals are good, but once the summertime hits, that leaves a lot of kids open and vulnerable to miss out on meals. And so what we do with this program is we offer nutritious meals at no cost to children 18 years and under throughout the entire state during the summer months of the year. We operate these programs generally in schools, nonprofit organizations. Oftentimes we might collaborate with government entities, so we'll be at parks or local community centers. And we really try to make sure that we're finding and identifying those local communities where those gaps are, where we know that there's either, it's been told to us that there's a need, or maybe some of the research that we've done on our department side has shown us that there's a gap, maybe as a food desert or some other challenges that might be in those communities. A really cool part about this program, as well as the fact that the participating organizations are eligible for reimbursements on any of the money that they're spending for that food program. So we know that's going to be very important for some of these more low-income communities where folks might not have the resources or might not have the funding to actually support some of these programs. They actually have an opportunity to have that money reinvested or redirected back to their organization. The next program that's really impactful and that we've seen a much higher increase in demand in recently is the Emergency Food Program, or TFAP. And so TFAP is actually a USDA program that we oversee that allows us to distribute high quality, nutritious foods to low income households. And so when we're talking about low income households, we're talking about families that might be anywhere from 130% to 180% of the federal poverty level. And what we're able to do is we partner with regional food banks across the state of Florida, who then work with local nonprofits, faith-based organizations, pantries, soup kitchens, or the like. And we're able to distribute those foods to folks that are really in need for them. And obviously with the pandemic and a lot of the economic challenges that we've seen over the last several months with COVID, there's been a huge increase in the need for these types of resources, and some of our food bank partners are even telling us that their demand has gone up at some places in some regions even over 100%. So it's really important to understand how programs like the Emergency Food Program have a real significant impact on our local food systems and obviously in our communities of need. And then the final program that I'll touch on before moving on to speak a little bit more about the actual Farm Bill itself is the Commodity Supplemental Food Program. And so this program is actually more so focused on elderly persons or seniors. Individuals who are 60 years or older are typically eligible for this if they're on a reduced income or if they're on a fixed income. A lot of times these elderly folks might not have family, or they might not have resources or an opportunity to actually get to the grocery store, or who knows what their situations might be at that time in their life. This actually allows us to provide them with monthly food distribution, so they have an allotted amount of food that lasts them about 3 to 4 weeks. And typically we're putting information in there about recipe creation, helping them better understand how they can use those foods, and always ensuring that they are diet sensitive, low sodium and nutritious meals, particularly for those elderly folks who might have some types of chronic disease or might be more sensitive to the types of food that they're eating. And so now that I've shared, like I said, kind of like a really 30,000 overview of what our division does and some of the programs that we have and how they really impact the food system, I'll transition into what I want to call a brief overview of the Farm Bill itself, starting with the history of it so folks can understand it, and then kind of transitioning more so to what that program has become today. And so to understand the Farm Bill and its importance, it's really needed to know how and why it was originally created. So when we think about the history of the Farm Bill, it was actually originally created by Franklin Roosevelt during the Great Depression back in 1933. And so when this bill was created, it had a few very small objectives at that time, which were specifically focused more so towards the farmers and farming community. And so what they were aiming to do was provide financial assistance to farmers who were struggling economically due to high crops supply and low prices. So farmers were really struggling. They had a lot of oversupply, and which really drove the prices down, which was making it difficult for them to actually make a living. And so, one of the things that the Farm Bill aimed to address was raising the price of farm goods by controlling the actual food supply itself, which was able to bring these farmers to a more stabilized economic income level. And it also stabilized the actual amount of food supply that was in our country to make sure that if there were ever any times of downturns or low crop yields, there was additional food that could be used during that time. And, kind of just to put a backdrop on that original Farm Bill, it came at a very, very heavy economic burden time, right? I mean, right now we're dealing with the recession due to COVID, but we're talking about the Great Depression. So the country had recently undergone something called the Dust Bowl, which many of you may have heard about, but if you're unfamiliar with it, it was a several-year drought that actually struck the Southern and Great Plains region, which surely exacerbated financial hardships for farmers, really put a bad situation for our actual food supply as a nation. And so in action, that legislation was authorized in the federal government to essentially pay these farmers not to grow too much food. And so this would help to stabilize prices, lower the commodities that were actually on the market, like corn, wheat, and rice. And when the supply of those goods went down, this really helped to bring those prices up for farmers. And so once we look at how the legislation is actually transitioned today, we'll see that, it's actually a lot different and much larger than it was in 1933. So today, the Farm Bill is actually classified as what's known as an omnibus bill, which essentially means that it's a package of many smaller pieces of legislation and smaller programs that are pieced into one major bill, one major appropriations bill that has to be reauthorized every 5 years. And so with the Farm Bill in particular, in 2008, which was the most recently authorized Farm Bill, just to kind of give you an idea of how much money this Farm Bill actually costs or how much funding is needed to authorize it, it costs $867 billion. And when you take about the average of that over an annual span, it's anywhere from about 100 to 150 plus billion dollars annually of a price tag on that program. So it really just goes to show you how much funding is going into this program to make sure that the food system is sustained. And while there are numerous components of the Farm Bill at large, many, many more than I could get into today, I think what I'm really going to focus on are 3 components that I believe are probably the most impactful to the food system. And they include the support for farmers, financial assistance for low-income consumers, and support for economic protections related to the agricultural industry. And so the first thing that I'll actually touch on is the Supplemental Nutrition Program, Assistance Program, also known as SNAP. So it's really important to understand and note that out of that large pot of money that the Farm Bill allocates, 80% of that funding goes towards the SNAP program. So that kind of gives you an idea of the necessary need and the amount of benefits that are needed to actually support some of the folks that are in our country that might not have as much or might have not as much access to the same resources as others. I'm sure everybody's familiar with SNAP, and some of you might actually know it as EBT, which actually changed back in the 2008 Farm Bill. The program is essentially a safety net for low-income families that provide them with a monthly benefit for food purchases. The individual allotment generally depends on household income, family size, employment status, and a few other kind of nuanced qualifications that actually determine how much benefits those people will actually get per month. And so the SNAP program has been extremely beneficial for a lot of families, especially during the COVID-19 pandemic with, like I said, large-scale layoffs that we witnessed over the last several months have really put people in a bad situation. And so many of these SNAP users have actually been able to receive an increase in their benefits following some of the coronavirus relief efforts that have happened through the CARES Act and some of the other legislation. There's also been something called pandemic EBT, which isn't directly affiliated with the Farm Bill itself, but certainly supports the food system and the fact that it's meant to help those families that would have typically been on free or reduced lunch and providing that value from that weekly lunch to actually go on an EBT card. So for those families that might not have been able to make it to some of the student meal drops that we have going on around the state, or students that might not have had the transportation to get to these locations, it still provides them and their families with an opportunity to go to the store and actually get food to support their needs. And the final SNAP innovation that's come out of the pandemic, which I think was really, I wouldn't say it's necessarily late, but it's certainly been a long time coming, is the ability to order SNAP online. And so that was actually authorized on a full-scale basis. It was a pilot previously in a few states, but at this point it's been authorized on a large scale, which is allowing individuals that have SNAP to actually get their groceries delivered to them. And while there's only a handful of online retailers right now that are operating within that space, we know that many more are sure to come along as we continue to develop the program and kind of shore up the technology that's needed to support it. The next portion, like I mentioned before, the SNAP benefits is a huge portion. It's 80% of the Farm Bill, but it doesn't leave out other necessary components as well. And as I mentioned before, that support for farmers is still very intrinsically a part of this bill as well. Farmers actually receive support from 2 main components of the bill, and they consist of farming subsidies and crop insurance. And so when we think about what a farm subsidy is, many of you may have heard of it before, but might not be exactly sure what it is or how they work. But essentially, these are governmental incentives that get paid to agribusiness, to agricultural organizations, to farming families, large and small farmers that supplement their income. And this point kind of goes back to my earlier explanation of why the Farm Bill was created in the beginning, which was to obviously support farmers economically, but also put some measures in place to kind of control the supply, control the types of foods that they're growing, and also control the quantity. So those farm subsidies, however, have experienced a little bit of criticism over the years from certain people that might be in opposition. This could be in part because sometimes farm subsidies are only applying to specific commodities, some of which aren't necessarily made for human consumption. So when we talk about food access and hunger, we understand that a lot of times these subsidies aren't actually going towards those types of foods. It's more so associated with, corn for ethanol fuel, or wheat for feed for livestock, cotton, and some other commodities that just simply aren't consumed. And so this has often led to some of these larger farms and larger farming entities to get these subsidies over smaller family farms who either, can't produce those commodities at the same amount, or they just don't grow that type of food because they're growing specialty crops like fruits and vegetables, which unfortunately are not covered in the Farm Bill for any type of subsidy program. So those are some of the challenges that are currently in it, and they're constantly trying to rework that legislation to figure out ways to help those smaller farms. But at this point, that is one of the issues that we typically hear about subsidies, and the reason why some folks are not in the most support of them. That second component for those farmer protections are crop insurance. And so when you think about crop insurance, this is actually something that farmers are able to purchase essentially as an insurance policy that's subsidized by federal crop insurance programs. The farmers will typically get what's called an indemnity payment, and these payments are typically based on maybe their current loss of crops, whether that be below average yield, or maybe it's below the average amount of revenue that they pull in annually. And so there's a lot of scientific measures that go into actually calculating how much these indemnity payments are. But these insurance policies are usually purchased under the federal insurance programs, and then they're provided by private insurance companies. And so typically what will happen with that is the USDA Risk Management Agency will subsidize those insurance payments and those expenses. So they'll take a portion of the company's administrative and operating expenses. They kind of share the underwriting gains and losses with the company. And so farmers are also eligible to apply for other plans as well, like that'll help them with the losses of revenue. But like I said, this is a lot more nuanced, and more so for those folks that are actually, maybe larger in the scale of farming, or dealing more so with those types of subsidy crops. But as I said before, both of these components are extremely important when we think about our food system and the mechanisms that are put in place to ensure that the food is produced to feed our nation. I mean, if some of these policies weren't in place, we might have farmers reconsidering the amount of volume of crops that they actually want to grow, or farmers reconsidering that farming operation altogether. So it's important to remember that, although a lot of the money is going towards those consumers that are really needing this, our farmers are also a very vulnerable population these days as it relates to the agricultural industry. And it's important to have those protections in place for them as well. As I also mentioned, conservation is intrinsically involved and included in this as well. And hopefully, as we continue to evaluate and see future farm bills, there'll be even more understanding of the importance of the environmental protection aspect. The conservation aspect of this bill has actually evolved over time. And in the beginning, when they were first doing these larger farming practices, people weren't necessarily as aware of the impact farming in large industrial farms have on the environment as it relates to some of the runoff, some of the other carbon emissions that are produced, and sometimes pollution that comes from these areas. So as a result, programs were created like the Environmental Quality Incentives Program, and the Conservation Stewardship Program. And these are all aimed at either protecting land that might be private land that will now be used for wildlife reserves, for farmers that might have extremely large areas of land that they're not actually growing things on, but they still want to protect and keep to their family. They're able to enter into these agreements where they can benefit from that land and also conserve it for environmental purposes. And there's also, like I said, things that are involved to really help with like irrigation and some of the drainage activity that goes on these farms to make sure that the neighboring locations and communities aren't affected by that negative runoff and pollution. One of the last things that I think a lot of folks might be interested to hear about that comes out of the Farm Bill, and this is going to be the last thing that I touch on, and I'll actually some of this information with Kendra as well so that she can share it afterwards, so folks that might want to do a little bit more of a deeper dive into it. But community grants as another thing, in grant programs that have come out of the Farm Bill legislation. And this has actually been made possible through the National Institute of Food and Agriculture. And so you might find a lot of programs these days that are going to help to assist folks that might be interested in getting involved with the farming industry. So programs for beginning farmers and ranchers, where they might be provided with technical assistant grants or sometimes startup grants to help them get their operation off the ground. There's also community food projects that help to support local food systems, like the creation of farmers markets, the creation of food hubs, and other more local central organizations or programs that will really have a significant impact on a ground level, as opposed to some of these more statewide and national programs that happen on a large scale. So those are some important things to really remember when you think about ways that an individual or an organization could get involved with the Farm Bill, or maybe, work to better understand what those benefits might look like. And as I said too, I'll definitely share a couple of links so that folks can see the different types of programs that are available and the different grant opportunities that exist. And typically these are recurring programs that will happen generally every year, or some of them might be on a rolling basis. So those are really important to keep in mind as well, as you are working to maybe start a project locally, or if you've got, maybe your local community government or your local county commission or city commission is interested in taking on some type of food access initiative. Definitely make sure to check out some of the opportunities that are available with these grants. And like I mentioned before, we'll make those available to you all once the presentation is over. I think the final part when we talk about the Farm Bill, or one of the things that I was asked to kind of speak about, is maybe like the future forecast and what that actually means for the next Farm Bill and what we might be able to expect. And I mean, if anybody's followed or knows a lot about the Farm Bill, sometimes these negotiations go smoothly, and other times they lag on and actually lapse and have to be amended and not actually reauthorized. And so the current Farm Bill, as I mentioned, that was authorized in 2018, is going to be valid through 2023. So we shouldn't expect any significant changes to the policy until we get a little bit closer to that 2023 deadline. But what I will speak to as it relates to, what people can do to prepare themselves for the upcoming Farm Bill, or if you're interested in understanding, how you might be able to have an actual impact on what goes into that legislation. I just think it's important for everybody to remember, as advocates, whether you're a small farmer, whether you're a leader of a nonprofit organization that's working to, increase food access for children or for seniors, or whatever lane you're in, it's important to recognize that you have that voice in this space. And when it relates to larger agricultural policy or larger federal policy at large, I think it's really easy for folks to maybe feel like they don't have a voice or they don't have a say in it. But I would encourage you all to look more into it to better understand some of the nuances of this program, some of the nuances of this legislation, so that way you can understand if it affects folks that you care about, or if it affects different programs or initiatives that you care about, and then find ways to, impact it on a local level by talking to local elected officials, whether that be your member of Congress, connecting with some of these federal organizations that are always advocating for SNAP, like FRAC, or some of these other advocacy organizations and groups that typically lobby for the better benefit of food access. And, as I mentioned before, SNAP and land conservation, while they're a part of the Farm Bill now, they're typically always on the chopping block. And I think most people on this call would recognize that when we talk about SNAP, we're dealing with a very delicate safety net that many people, especially during the COVID pandemic, are typically dealing with things that might be out of their control. And they really need that support, and they really need to have those benefits and make sure that they're in place and that they're in line and that there isn't someone trying to pull them or to reduce them. And as it relates to conservation and protection of the environment, I think it's very evident that climate change and other environmental impacts have had a negative connotation as it relates to where we are with our environment and kind of what our current environmental state is. So it's really important that you all, especially I think we're about 3 or 4 days out now from one of the most important elections that will ever be, to just continue to stay vigilant, continue to stay very active, understanding that your voice matters. And at this point in time, the best way for any of us to be advocates is definitely going to start in the voting booth on November 3rd. And so I think that's really where I want to kind of leave it for now. Definitely open to any questions, but really putting that onus on everybody that's participating, and really let you all know that you can be in the driver's seat for this stuff as well if you just stand up and let your voice be heard. And hoping that everybody on this call, if you haven't had an opportunity to do so far, definitely exercise your right to go out and vote this election.
Oh, okay. Terrific. Kendra, am I on right now?
Yes, we can hear you, Del.
That's great. Mikhail, tremendous presentation, exceptionally well done.
Thank you.
Topic that for many people, even people that are active in the food system, is really a blind spot, an area that we just don't know enough about. You outlined it wonderfully. I'm going to just 1 minute and mention one text. I was just excited when you mentioned the origin of the original Farm Bill back in the Roosevelt administration, going back, and you mentioned the Dust Bowl. And just because it's, kind of what we try to do on the Florida Food Policy Forum is also to further expand people's understanding. We just want to mention a great text. I don't know if it's showing up. It's called Dust Bowls of Empire, which is a great text on the Dust Bowl. And I don't know, Kendra, if this is even showing up on the screen. It looks like it's not for me. That's a great book if you want to read about the Dust Bowl. We're going to open it up to questions now. I have a couple myself, but I am going to go ahead and defer to our listeners. So, Kendra, I'm going to go ahead and mute myself again, and I'll let you field the questions. And then if time allows, towards the end, I have a couple myself. So tremendous work, Mikhail. We're going to have questions now. Kendra?
Awesome.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Mikhail. We are going to open up for questions. I do notice Sarah's hand is raised. Sarah, did you have a question for Mikhail?
Hi, yes. Thank you for taking my call, and thank you for this excellent presentation. I live in North Central Florida, and I serve as the chair of the Solano St. John Sierra Club. So that's something that just gives you some context of why we're engaged on this conversation today. I was very interested in the programs that you were speaking about with the Farm Bill that relate to environmental concerns, and especially as going forward, we are in Florida especially going to be seeing more extreme weather events and things that might impact our yields in crops. And my question to you really relates to, with the crop insurance program, what types of programs should we be advocating for that would address climate change, and especially as it relates to things that we are now learning about within our food systems that could support regenerative agriculture, more biodiversity within our conventional crop systems. I understand, the position in the past from the Department of Ag, even though it may have been an unintended consequence, was get big or get out. And right. I'm just wanting to know what your thoughts are, where we should be advocating for or addressing changes that now have to come in order to address these concerns around climate.
Thank you, Sarah, thank you for joining today, and also thank you for that question. And you're absolutely right. As I mentioned during my presentation, it's very evident now. Science has shown it, and not only has science shown it, but you know, our environment, our atmosphere, our climate, and a lot of the different natural disasters that we're starting to see at a more exacerbated rate are definitely evident that there needs to be more. There needs to be more of an effort to protect our environment. There needs to be more of an effort for conservation. And so, you know, I know you mentioned as far as like advocating for what type of crop insurance or, you know, how to best go about it. I think you said it kind of well. It's like get big or get out. And I think that's the mentality that truly has to change. And so I think for us, one of the things that we're really trying to do, especially from a department standpoint, is really trying to find and identify those individuals that are interested in being in the farming industry, and especially those smaller farming entities that, you know, really don't have the same luxury that some of these industrial farms have. And, you know, unfortunately, as it relates to policy and politics, a lot of times the reason that these bills and the legislation is driving that way is because there's a lot of money behind the way that things are set up now. And so I just think it's important to, you know, as a local organization, things that you can do is really try to identify, you know, who are those local farmers in your area, right? Like who are the small farmers or who are the farming entities that exist? And, you know, if you're talking about regenerative agriculture or you're talking about ways to cultivate or to produce commodities but not have as much of a severe impact on the environment, I think it's important to align yourself with the group that you're trying to speak to or that could benefit from it most. And it kind of goes back to what I was saying before. A lot of times these smaller farmers, these smaller entities, they might not necessarily have that same type of advocate, right? They might not have the dollars, but if we can kind of band around these organizations and band around these individuals and these family-based farms and smaller farms, and also nurture individuals who are interested in getting into those fields, and really work around what are the things that they best need. And I think that's really the approach that we try to take, is trying to identify what those needs are and then bringing those back to the table to be that sounding board for the masses and at large. And, you know, in your position and there in Central Florida, I'm sure that there's some, you know, local agricultural or local farmers markets that you might participate in that, you know, your average day, maybe small farmer, and really trying to man and create those coalitions and attach your efforts to larger organizations that are trying to make a national reach. Because, you know, I'll be honest, it's difficult to impact federal policy as an individual by yourself. But once you build your coalitions, once you know, get the proper information that's needed, and you find the folks that are like-minded and are working towards those same goals, you're able to get out of those silos and really align yourself to create the kind of change that we're looking for. So I don't think there's one silver bullet or a straight arrow as to how we can do this, but what it's definitely going to take is more grassroots advocacy and more of those folks that are really being negatively impacted by some of these policies that come out of these farm bills that might be better for larger entities or larger industrial farms, to get their voices out here too, and elevate those voices to the people that matter most, which typically are your members of Congress who are debating and making these policy issues and decisions.
And a follow-up, I'm sorry to interject again, but I've learned of a program called Agrarian Trust, or these are like concerned as land trusts for agriculture. Are you familiar with these, and how are they an entity that we could perhaps form within our state to encourage the preservation of farmlands and good practices on those farms?
Yes, ma'am. So I am familiar with the Agrarian Trust. I had an opportunity last year to go to a more community-based conference in Savannah, Georgia, and the Agrarian Trust actually had kind of like a half-day symposium where they talked about the different things that they've been able to do as far as their conservation efforts, ways that they're working with older farmers who have quite a bit of land that might be aging out of the process, but trying to connect those older farmers with interested young farmers or interested beginning farmers so that they can benefit from the land piece. You know, the farmers understand that their land will be used for a good purpose and good stewards. And it's really trying to build that community around the protection of these areas. And so I would say, from my knowledge and my understanding, when I participated with the Agrarian Trust, they did not have an organization or an entity yet set up in Florida at that time. Now, that may have changed over the course of the last year or so, but what I would definitely encourage you to do is, if that's something that you're interested in trying to find inroads with, is to collaborate with those organizations. And a lot of times it's really just an email or so away. The way that I've been able to build my network and really work with a lot of different organizations and learn is just, if I see something online, if I see an email, I type up my introduction and I reach out to them and say, hey, let's have a conversation. And I know particularly the Agrarian Trust, they have a great staff and they have people that are really committed to the land and are good stewards of the land, and they want to see it done right. So I think that would be a good organization to at least reach out to and see what their presence looks like here in Florida. And if they don't have a presence and that's something that you're interested in maybe championing, or you might know some other folks around the state or other coalitions, I think it would be a great idea.
Thank you.
All right, well, our next question comes from Doc Rob. He asked, if I am interested in soil health research and testing inputs for assisting our Florida food and crops, what department or area should I be addressing?
Is that referring from a national level or from a state level?
I believe it's a state level.
Okay. So we do have a soil institute, and we actually do have a division that works on soil health and soil science within the Department of Agriculture. I haven't worked very closely with them because that is more of a science-based division. But what I would say, if folks are interested in trying to connect with some of the divisions or some of the different programs that we have at FDACS, I've shared my contact information right there on the screen. So you see my email address. So if you're interested in trying to find ways that you can connect with our department's soil health division and trying to learn what opportunities there might be for, either voluntary or some type of advocacy or just getting more someone involved so that you're in the loop, that's something that I can certainly do, and I would be more than happy to facilitate that if that individual will reach out to me via email.
We also had another question from Anthony Olivieri. He asks, how do you recommend nonprofits engage elected officials around the Farm Bill and local programs for it? As nonprofits, we have to balance a fine line between education and lobbying.
Yeah, that is a great point. And to some extent, it can be a little difficult depending on, what your status as a nonprofit is. I know some nonprofit organizations might have some types of bans, or, they don't have necessarily the authority, or it's kind of not within their statutes to do any type of lobbying. But there are a lot of advocacy groups that can work in that more of that support role or more in that lobbying role. You've got organizations like No Kid Hungry that does a lot of lobbying efforts. You've got organizations like FRAC that do a lot of lobbying efforts. So I think the best thing to do as a nonprofit organization, number one, is coalition build. And while you might not want to lobby, there's nothing wrong with the nonprofit organization really starting at the ground up. And, when it comes down to it, like I say, the election this year is extremely important. And a lot of times people try to figure out, why are things so disrupted, or why are things going in such a different direction? Well, it's because you kind of got to know how to go up that path. And I think typically all politics is local. And we know that Farm Bill is more of a federal piece. And so, our legislators in Congress are the ones making a lot of these decisions. But I think there's something really important to understand once you can get a band of folks in a community together around an important issue and really coalition build. And I continue to say that because it's really the only way to do it. We think about the battle that we're fighting when you're trying to fight for good and food access, but you're also going against high dollar lobbyists that are on the opposite end of that conversation. And so it really just comes down to engaging those folks in your community. I would recommend going to your city commissioner, going to the county commissioners, making a meeting with all of them and really trying to find innovative ways to hold them accountable to the issues that you care about. And I think that can be done through numbers. You know, like I said, me going to my city commissioner by myself, not in my capacity, but if I was just, you know, a traditional citizen, they might say, oh, well, yeah, that's an interesting idea. But if I get 50 people or if I get 30 people, and I'm able to get that group of people engaged and energized around these issues, and we're able to hit those, it has to be a constant thing. It can't be a one time I come and meet my city commissioner this year and then I never see him again until the following. We got to constantly be in these folks' offices. We got to constantly be reaching out to them. And I know this for a fact because, you know, I've worked in those legislative roles as a legislative correspondent in Congress, getting letters from people where it's, you know, 2 or 3 letters and then there's 150 letters. And so if I get 150 letters about a specific issue, that's a red flag for me to go say, hey, something's going on with this issue, something's going on with this piece of legislation. You know, we need to look into that more. And so that's really what I would recommend, is just being very consistent with your messaging and continuing to build and really presenting those actual stories of what it looks like, what those faces of those issues look like. And as opposed to just being so nuanced about it, bringing the faces that are actually dealing with these issues, having them come to these commission meetings and speak, and having them come to these other opportunities where their opinions can be voiced. And you just have to keep knocking at the door. I know it sounds like, I don't want to say it's a cliche answer, but in my experience, it works. I worked as a political field organizer, and I know the difference between having an event with 5 volunteers and an event with 50 volunteers. So it's just about the amount of impact you can have and the amount of people you can engage around those issues. And you just kind of have to chip away at it. But Anthony, I would say really try to align yourself with a firm or an organization that can lobby and has a strong lobbying arm, and see what inroads that you can make with them, and let them know that your organization wants to be, you know, a strategic partner with them. But, you know, you just can't do all the same things that they do as it relates to those policy conversations and pushes.
I believe that's all the questions that we have in our text box. Del, did you have a few questions for Mikhail?
Sure. Yeah, and thanks again to Mikhail. The presentation itself and the Q&A even better, really, I think, in terms of responding directly to the issues and the questions that folks brought forward.
Thank you, Del.
Except for the moment. Yeah, I had a couple questions that I'm trying to generalize them in such a way that the listeners might benefit as a whole from the questions. Let's go ahead and get to the elephant in the room, so to speak.
Okay.
The subsidy issue. You brought it up in your presentation, and
Right.
I think it's one that folks that have followed the way the Farm Bill works and its impact on local communities are aware of. And it's the challenge, if you will, that subsidies often do go to big ag and the large monocrop operations. And it's challenging for the smaller farmers, and especially farmers, to get to benefit much from the subsidies that are available. The specific, that's kind of the reality, if I'm not mistaken. My question would be are there efforts that are being made by your office, the Department of Agriculture, our state? Are there efforts that are being made to address that issue on behalf of the smaller farmer and the specialty crop farmer? And is there an effort that is being made nationwide from other departments of agriculture and consumer services to try to reverse that challenge?
That's the $1 million question right there, or the $1 billion question, I should say, Del. When it comes down to these subsidies, they are definitely one of the more I don't want to say confrontational, but they're one of the hot button topics that comes up. And, you know, as I was looking more into the Farm Bill and, you know, really trying to just kind of get, not only educate myself, but sharpen my own knowledge of it and how those subsidies work. You know, typically you're right. It's the small end of the stick, the smaller farmers, the ones that aren't making as much, generally are the ones that are missing out on those subsidies. And like I said in the presentation, it's because they're growing more so specialty crops and produce, vegetables, fruits, and they're not growing those other subsidized commodities, like I said, that sometimes don't even go into the actual food system itself. Now, I know that there have been efforts to try to add more of those commodities, to try to get some of the specialty crops, to try to push for certain crops that are grown in a higher volume here in Florida, to be added to some of these lists, so that there can be a larger benefit outside of the traditional, wheat, corn, cotton, soybeans, things of that nature. There have been some small pushes on that, but what I would say, it's not something that I've heard from a very loud level here at the department. I know that Commissioner Fried is very vigilant on a lot of these issues, and she works very closely with our farming industry. So we're always trying to figure out, how can we be the best advocate for them as it relates to interacting with the USDA. And we've been able to find ways to, be positive advocates, especially during COVID-19, with encouraging the USDA to, buy more Florida commodities and more Florida produce for the emergency food program on a federal level. Through what's called like Section 32. And so from that angle, we are always trying to work with them, but I personally have not heard of any major pushes that are catching traction right now that it relates to changing the way those subsidies work and trying to get them, to better benefit smaller farmers on a large scale level. What I would say, we've had a certain administration in the White House and in Congress and in the House for the last 4 years. And like I said before, and I keep touching on this because I want people to understand just the importance of it. You have to understand when you're voting and when you're being involved in the political process, who is it that you are going to support and what is it that they believe in? And so I would say that there is probably a possibility that these conversations could get pushed a little bit further down the line. But it's going to take members of Congress. It's going to take, a leadership in the White House that's open to those conversations. They're going to be more open to, creating more access for these smaller entities. And at the time and over the last several years, it really hasn't been the case, especially when this farm bill is being reauthorized. So that's kind of the longer way to say at this point, is there any major effort? No. But there are smaller grassroots efforts to try to get more of those commodities added. It's just, like I said before, it really takes that leadership on the federal level to get a lot of these things kind of ironed out and sharpened out. And I think we can do that by, like I said, really shoring up our support, really putting our arms around local farmers, really putting our arms around small farmers, and finding ways to utilize the Florida Food Policy Council, utilize some of these other statewide entities to say, hey, let's bring these folks to the table. So now that we've got a larger amount of folks that care about this, now let's go take this to each stakeholder that has an invested interest in it or that has a say in how we're going to go about doing this. And I think that's very possible. We've seen it throughout history when people were able to come together to get major things accomplished. And, with the agricultural industry, it's a big fight. I mean, the industrial agriculture system it's some people might say that it's operating in its own disinterest, but we still have to be vigilant as individuals and just really, like I said, find a way to build on these local farmers and amplify their voices.
Well, very well said, Mikhail. And again, I'll just reiterate what I said before. The presentation was exceptional. The answers to the questions were superior. I want to extract something from what you just said in the time, and we're running out of time. One is I think 3 or 4 times you said it's important to vote. And I want to underscore that as well. It really does make a difference who's in the legislature, both at the Florida state level, but also at the national level, because these are the movers and the shakers that actually drive through the policy changes that are absolutely necessary to see success. I will, and I'm also kind of following up on something that Anthony brought up. Florida Food Policy Council obviously represents all of Florida and tries to. But one particular area that I think is of importance that kind of to lobby a bit is the area of those specialty food crops and the small farmers. And they are the ones that are, for the most part, left out of the larger subsidies. You mentioned it and you referred to it, and you also observed how difficult it is for those smaller groups to get traction. So I just want to kind of wave the flag a little bit and say, because there's so many growers in Florida that would fit those categories, either small producer or specialty crop producers, that it's very important, to the degree that it's possible, for the Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services to also be their advocate as well. So that's kind of my parting remark on that. We only have a few minutes left. I want to turn this back to Kendra for a moment. So Kendra, that you can tell us a little bit about what's coming up. And I also want to say to everyone that's involved in this project here, that's listening today, as well as those that may be listening on tape or in the recording, please do consider sharing a contribution with the Florida Food Policy Council. We are a not-for-profit organization that seeks to represent the interests and the needs of all Floridians, not just farmers and growers, but every consumer in the state of Florida as it pertains to food systems and food policies. If you can see your way clear to share a donation with us, it would be most appreciated. And there is a donation site that's on the Florida Food Policy Council webpage. That being said, I'm going to close it out and turn it back to Kendra to tell us about what's coming up in November. Kendra?
Well, thanks everyone so much for joining us today. Thank you to Mikhail, a fantastic presentation. And thank you to Dell for moderating. It would not be what it is without you. We are going to hold our next Florida Food Forum on November 20th, the third week of November, because of the Thanksgiving holiday the following week. It'll be on the 20th at the same time from 12 to 1 p.m. and on the important topic of Black Farmers Matter. So we will have a great panel joining us for the forum. Our event is already up on Eventbrite. We will have a few more panelists. Their information will be updated in the next few days, and then our event will also be posted to Facebook.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Kendra. And again, thank you, Mikhail, tremendous event. And thank you everyone for joining us on this edition of Florida Food Forum. See you again next month. Bye now.
Goodbye, everybody. Thanks again.
Thanks, everyone.